In this video, I will talk a bit more about classes and objects. We will talk about copy constructors, the equals method to compare objects of the same class, as well as aggregation. What is a copy constructor? A copy constructor is a constructor that creates a copy of an existing object of the same class. Have a look at this piece of coding. We have two fields for the subject class, subject code and subject name. So every subject object will have a subject name as well as a subject code. Let's have a look at the first constructor. This is the normal constructor. So when we create a new object using this constructor, we set the subject code field as tpg10ab as passed into the constructor. And we set the subject name as technical programming 1 to create this green subject object in memory. If we then use the copy constructor call to create a new object, we pass in the green existing subject object in order to make a copy of it as the new object. So how do we make a copy of an object? We need to copy all fields of the object we want to copy to the fields of the new object that will be constructed. So for our blue object, we set the subject code the same as the subject code of the green passed in object. And we set the subject name of the blue object to the subject name of the green object. And now we made a copy of the green object. It is very important to realize that although these two objects are now identical, they exist in memory at two different locations. The subject variable will hold the memory location of the green object, and the copy of subject variable will hold the memory location of the blue object. So if we have the following statement, if subject with the two equal signs, copy of subject, it means that we are testing to see if the memory locations of the two objects are the same. In this example, they exist at two different memory locations, so this if statement will result in a false value, even though the two objects are exactly the same. So how can we then test if two objects of the same class are identical? We need to write the equals method. Your equals method will need to return a Boolean value as we are testing to see if two objects are equal or not. You will also need to pass in a subject object, that's an object of the same class, to compare this to. It is very important now to realize that by calling this equals method, we have a subject object that calls the method and a subject object that is passed into the method. Our green object in this statement is the object that calls the equals method, and the blue object is the object that is passed into the method. In order to compare objects to see if they are the same, we need to compare all the fields of the one object with all the fields of the other object. So we will compare the subject code of the green object with the subject code of the blue object. The this keyword refers to the object that called the method, in this case the green one. Then we also compare the subject name of the green object with the subject name of the blue object. Only when all fields of the green object are equal to all fields of the blue object will they be exactly the same and will the equals method return true. Okay, so let's just quickly have a look at the subject class in the IDE. So in the subject class, you can see again, like the code that I've shown you in the slides now, we've got a subject code and a subject name. So there's the subject constructor that accepts the code and the name, and we set the code and the name to our subject code and subject name. There's the copy constructor that accepts a subject object. We compare, or we basically set our subject code to the subject object that was passed in subject code, and we set our subject name to the subject that was passed in subject name. Then there's the getters that returns a subject code and a subject name. There's the setters that will set a subject code and a subject name. And then we've got the equals method that I've gone through in the slides. So in the equals method, the calling method or the calling subject object, the one that's calling the equals method, is referred to as this.subject code. And then you call the equals method. What is this equals method in any case? I didn't do that on the slides, but this equals method actually means we are comparing two strings. So that's the string class's equals method. It's not referring to our own equals method. So we're comparing the subject code of the object that calls the equals method with the subject code of the one that was passed through. And then if the subject code and the name of both of them are the same, then we know that the equals method will return true and the two objects are the same. One last thing for every class that we need to have is in fact a toString method. So I'm just going to quickly remove this toString method here by just commenting it out. So multi-line comment, and I'm going to save it quickly, and I'm going to go to the class that's got the main method. Now I'm just going to test a normal subject object. So you can see there I've created the subject. So I said subject equals new subject TPG10AB technical programming 1. So it will set the code to TPG10AB and set the subject name to technical programming 1. Now if I print out that, so I'm just going to say system out print line, and let's run it quickly. So if you run it, you can see that it prints out a lot of garbage there, basically hash code. So this is why we need a toString method for every class that we do. So the toString method will basically just define what is going on in this class for every field. So if I say public string toString, I'm overriding the superclass method of toString that prints out that hash codes and that nonsense that we saw on the screen now. So we'll basically be overriding this toString method that prints out this. So by adding add override at the top, just like a normal comment, to just say that we are overriding the superclass's toString method. And now what we want to do is we want to give some information about the two fields inside of this class. So you can see I just say subject info, going to a new line, then subject code, and then show the subject code. Going to a new line, show the subject name, and then actually show the subject name. So when we run this now, it's overwriting that garbaged toString method. And you can see it prints out subject info, the code, and then the subject name. Okay, so that's it for the subject class. So what I want to do next is go to the student class, and I'm going to work with you guys to see if we can't get the equals method done here as well as the copy constructor. So you can see a normal student class has got a student name and it's got a student number. Then we've got the normal constructor that accepts a name and a number and sets it to our name and number. Then we've got a get student name that returns the student name. We've got a get student number that returns the student number. We've got a set student name that takes a name and sets it to our object's name. And we've got a set student number that was set student name. This was set student number that takes in a number and sets it to our student number. And then we have the toString method again, just explaining our two variables. Okay, so in this class, let us quickly create the copy constructor. So the copy constructor will still be the same name as the class, but when we do a copy constructor, you will remember from the slides now that we need to pass in a student object, in this case, an object of the same type of the class, to make a copy of it. So then we will say that our student name, the one that we've got at the top, for the object that we're busy creating, should be the same as the one that was passed through's name. Sorry, not name, student name, stud name. Okay, so basically our new object stud name will be the same as the object that was passed through's stud name. And then our stud number, student number, will be the same as this student object that was passed through's student number. And this is the copy constructor. So I hope you did this without any problems. So this is creating the copy constructor. Then let's quickly do the equals method. So remember, the equals method will be public Boolean. Why Boolean? Because we are returning either a true or a false value to say the two objects are the same or they're not the same. And then we're going to use the equals method, or call it equals. And then in the equals method, we also want to pass in a new student object. Let's just call it student. Okay. Now what we want to do in order to test if these two are the same, we can just go and say if the calling object, the one object that calls the method. Now remember, if I'm going to use this method, I could do something like this. Let's say I've got two student objects. Let's say student2 equals new student. And then just quickly create a new student, let's say J Jones, and then there's the student number. Okay, so in order to use this equal method, I'm going to say if student dot equals, and then in brackets I'm going to pass in student2. Okay, so this is how we use the equals method. So there's an object that calls the method, and there's an object that was passed into the method. So let's just quickly go back. So I'm testing with the this keyword, I'm testing the one that called the method. So I'm saying if this, the one that called the method, dot, and in this case we've got a student name and number, so I'm going to test if the student name, and because student name is a string, in order to compare we also use an equals method, but that equals belongs to the string class. So we're going to say if this dot student name, the object that called the method student name, is the same as student, this is this one that was passed through, dot student name. Okay, so we're comparing the two objects' student names. If they are the same, and at the same time also this, which is the calling object, this dot student number, now the student number is a long. So to compare student numbers, you'll use the double equal sign. So we're going to say if this dot student number is the one that's passed through, which is called student dot student number. So if those two are also the same. So if the names are the same and the student numbers are the same, and remember for a student object, there's only two fields, and for the equals method, you need to compare all fields. So comparing both of them did the job. Then we can say return true, and then we can have an else part there that we can return the false. Okay, and then you can see Java will cry a bit there to say this if statement is redundant. You'll see in the slides I did this differently. So maybe this is easier to understand, to say, well, if this whole thing is true, then we return true, else we're going to return false. But remember, the shortest way to do this is just to say return there. So because this whole statement will either be true or false, that's the same value that we will be returning. So this is doing the equals method and the copy constructor for the student class. In the last part of this video, I want to quickly talk about aggregation. So aggregation basically takes place when we've got a class like this exam paper class, and inside the class, the fields that we have for the class are actually other objects. So you can see we've got a subject class, the one we did in the slides. We've got a student class that we just completed now, and then we've got the exam paper class. But the exam paper class as fields are using the student class and is also using the subject class as fields. So this we call aggregation. Fields in a class which is objects of another class. Okay, so let's just quickly run through this. We've got the exam paper class, which has got a field of type student and a field of type subject, and then it's got the marks, which is of type int. Now for the constructor seems easy to do. So we accept a new student object, we accept a new subject object, and we accept the mark as the constructor. But when we assign, we can't say student equals stud. So the Java convention here is to not say student equals stud like we do with let's say student. We just said student name equals name. Okay, but in this case, because we're referring to an object, it means that if I pass this object to student, that student and stud will now refer to the exact same object. So this could be troublesome. So instead of just saying student equals stud, we need to use the copy constructor of the student class. So there's the student class, there's the copy constructor. So what we will do, instead of assigning that exact same object to it, we are assigning a new copy of it. So we're going to say new student, and then in brackets passing the student object, which will make a copy of this one and then send the memory location back to student. Okay, so this is the better convention to do this. So we're going to do the same for subject, because this subject and subject, if we just assign it like this, will basically point to the same object. We need to make a copy. So we're going to say new subject, and then in brackets, we're going to pass in that subject object. For the marks, which is a normal int, we can just assign the value. Now the same for the getStudent. Instead of returning the student object, which we got there at the top, it means that this student object and the one that we're going to send it to will refer to the exact same one. So instead of doing that, we're also going to say new student and then passing in the student object, which means that we are making a copy of it and then sending it out. The same for this get subject. We're going to say new subject and then passing in the subject object to first make a copy of it and then send back the memory location of it. For get marks, remember marks is just a normal int, so we're passing just the int there. To set a student as well, if we pass in a student and we want to set it to our student field, we cannot use just stud there, because then student as well as stud will refer to the exact same object. So again, we're just going to say new student using the copy constructor to make a copy of it. The same for set subject. We're going to use new subject and then passing in that subject object in order to make a copy of it before we setting it to our current field. For set marks, remember marks is just a normal int, so we can just set the marks. And then for the toString method, this is quite interesting, the toString method. If you start working with the toString method, we can just say exam paper info, because this is the exam paper class, going to a new line, showing the marks, which will be our marks field there, and then we need to show student and subject. But because the student class has got its own toString method, we can just use that toString method. So we're going to say student.toString and then go to a new line, and then say subject.toString, because subject also has got its own toString method that will run by just calling the toString method. And then we've got everything settled there. Okay, so if I quickly go to more classes and objects there, let's just look at this example now. I'm going to remove those. So you can see there that we have created, sorry, let me just delete that line. We've created a subject object, we've created a student object, and now I've created a new exam paper object. So the exam paper constructor there accepts a student object, a subject object, and then a mark. So there you can see the student object, the subject object, and a mark of 100. So now we could ask the following question. Please give me the name of the subject. Name of the subject by using this exam object. So if I want to have the name of this subject, which should be that one. So if we go to subject, you can see there's subject name. I want to have that subject name by using the exam object. So using the exam object, I need to go to the subject field, which is an object on its own. So we're just going to call get subject. So get subject will return the subject object, this one. And then we want to have the name of the subject. So on that object, we're going to say get subject name. And then we've got the name of the subject. So quite interesting. We're using the exam object, exam paper object, which consists of 3 fields. By calling the get subject method, it returns a copy of our subject object. And returning that object, so get subject actually returns a subject object. And then on that subject object, there we go, we've got also getters to get the subject code and the subject name. So I'm just on that object, I'm calling get subject name. For the same thing, we can also do string, let's say student number equals exam. So by using this exam object also, give me the student number. So in order to get the student number, I need to go to the student object. So I'm going to call get student to get the student object. And if I say then a dot there and I start typing get, you can see there's the options, get the student name or the student number. And now it gets me the student number. Okay, so that's basically it for, let me just see, that student number is not a string, it's an int or a long. So that should probably work. Okay, so this then wraps it up for aggregation, copy constructors, as well as the equals method. I hope you've learned from this video.